Hello everybody, welcome to Red Tool House. On today's video, I want to talk about how I produce my own lumber for projects here on the farm. So come with me. Now, if you've been with the channel for a while, you may say, well, Troy, this is kind of dumb. You obviously take your chainsaw, you go in the woods, you cut a tree down, and you put it on your mill, and you turn it into lumber. And yeah, that's maybe the summary for the video, but there's actually a lot of things that go into this process and different decisions, different forks in the road based upon what we're trying to do. So let me give you an example here. So at the time of recording this video, lumber prices still stink on ice. They are really high, and it's ridiculous how much basic dimensional lumber costs, and any wood product for that matter. So right now, even with these lumber prices high, it's kind of changed how I go about doing things when it comes time for lumber for projects. For example, if I was going to be working on something that required a lot of sheet goods, plywood, OSB, those type of things, I may just go ahead and table that project or find a way to mill, substitute those sheet products for maybe something's milled if it makes sense. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a second. But then also with the project, it's one of those things where if I was going to be doing some furniture in the wood shop, you're building something like that, versus trying to, here, let's say, put the face on the barn that you guys are really anxious for me to do. So if I decide to work on that, obviously that's two complete different processes on the type of lumber I'm going to produce and how I gather it. So back to that point about the cut list, depending on the projects that I have, so like right now, doing some rough carpentry projects, building a new coop, what we call our backyard coop. We'll be getting to that here in later videos. And then some other structures that we're building either here on the farm or up at our camp. It requires a lot of dimensional lumber. So those projects determine the cut list, the size of the wood, the length, the dimensions, those type of things. And also other factors is the timeline. When do I need it? How long do I have to allow it to dry? So you can see, like right here, I've got these 2x8s that I milled back, it's been several months now, and they're poplar, so they're drying out pretty quickly. They're going to be used in the floor, the subfloor of this new chicken coop. So they're going to go down first, so obviously that's what I milled first. So with the price of sheet goods as high as they are, this project, this coop project, would call for, it's an 8x10, so it would call for several sheets of 4x8 sheet products. OSB, most likely 7/16 would be the basic. That's $52 a sheet right now, so that ain't happening. And for the floor of a chicken coop, you really want to do OSB anyway. You'd want to do an actual heavier duty plywood. But I'm not about to spend $50 or $60, $70, $80 for one sheet of plywood. To me, that seems un-American, and I ain't doing it. I ain't no commie. So what I'm looking at is actually changing, because of lumber prices, changing my cut list to reflect that instead of using sheet material for floor sheeting, maybe I go old school and do 1x material like they used to do back in the days before plywood or OSB was a thing. Now I have some oak, actually some red oak, looks like 1x6 laying there that I could use. It would seem a shame to put red oak in the floor of a chicken coop, so we probably will mill up either some pine or poplar instead. But that's just an additional challenge. If you're going to use that much material, then that requires more labor versus just buying the sheet material. So really the next item on my checklist, may seem kind of odd, is weather. Weather plays a factor into how I'm going to produce lumber. Right now, we are in the midst of a little bit of a dry spell. We had rain earlier in the week. Humidity is really low right now, which is a good thing. And that's dried out a lot of our roads. So as I go into the woods to select timber to put on the ground and drag down here, then the less muddy my roads are, then the less muddy my log is, which then requires a less amount of time to pressure spray it clean, or if I decide to skip that part, the less time I spend in either debarking or just dulling a blade because the log's full of mud. So the fact that it's dry right now, and it's going to be for the next several days, is an opportunity to replenish my inventory. Right now, if we turn around here, that's really all I got. I got one poplar log left that may have 3 millable logs in it. So we need to go get some more if indeed we're going to mill quite a bit of material. Scared me to death. For those of you that wondered in previous videos, those are my black bears, quote unquote black bears that everybody keeps commenting about. They're walking around behind me when I'm doing these videos. Hogs, actually. All right, so I just tuned up the chainsaw chain with my, where'd it go? Steel sharpener here. Probably one of the best sharpeners that I've ever used. Not sponsored by that or anything, but I've really appreciated and enjoyed how well this puts a nice edge back on the chain. So we're going to hop in the side-by-side and I guess kind of go shopping. There's a couple places I want to look specifically for certain trees that we want and just see how the ease and the location are going to be right now. So come with me. So the first place I'm looking is up here at the top of my south pasture, which is north facing. Little pig wallow right there at a spring. But I'm looking for poplar right now for the projects that we're wanting to work on. And I've got this one poplar growing against this beech, but it may have died. Let's see if it's a viable option or not. So she's still somewhat alive. The top's broken out of it and it looks like it's dead, but it actually has a couple viable limbs on it that are just green and leafy. But you can see where those beech and that poplar have grown together. It's made an interesting split there. So if I would cut that without trying to kill the beech, then I would need to cut it pretty high. So I'd lose some of that log. And of course, trying to drop it with these beech limbs wrapped all around it would be a little exercise. So I'm going to put a check mark by that one, that's a good log that we'd want to use. But let's go see if we can find something easier to access right now. Another point I take into consideration when I'm in the woods is, again, not just grabbing a random tree just because it's there, it's convenient, but how it fits into my grand plan of silvopasture and forest management here. So here's an example of a little poplar that is in an area that I'd like to take out. This is a spot, let me turn around here. This is a spot where we've got a little bit of a meadow. Yeah, that's a boat. There's a whole story behind that as to why there's still a boat on our property. Been here 20 years. Wasn't mine. But we're thinning this out a little bit. We want more grass to come in. You can see in the shade, it doesn't get as grassy as it does in the open areas. So if we thin out some of these trees, open up the canopy, of course, we get some grass growing. And I want to be selective. I like poplar on the mill. B, they don't produce any protein for the pigs, so those usually go. Some of the pines usually go. But we'll leave behind, what am I looking at here? There's a couple hickory in there. So we'll leave those behind, and then there's some beech. There's always beech. Beech produce those nuts for the pigs. So when I go to select a tree, I want to make sure, A, it's the species I want for the project that I need. B, it's in a location that I want to take it down. And C, when I take it down, is it going to be in a precarious situation? It's going to make it tough to get out. And is that situation going to cause damage to other trees that I want to keep in place for silvopasture, for protein production? This poplar is like a lot of social media profile pictures you see. From a certain angle, it looks pretty straight. But when you come around here, you can see it's got a pretty good curve in it. So we're going to punt on this one, and we may address that later. Okay, back here in the dark of the woods, I have found, I think, a poplar that's kind of on the edge. You can see the edge of our clearing. So right over here where all the sun brightness is our clearing that we dozed off several years ago. Area where eventually we'll have pigs move over into and other things. And we've got a pretty good sized tulip poplar right here that's right against the creek bank. And I believe the way she's laying, the way she's standing, I should say, not laying yet, I believe I can drop her right down either side of this little poplar and put that right in the flat where we want to be. Now she'll have to come across this saddle, so when I release it, definitely something we want to get back from because it's going to want to kick up big time. So we'll have our escape route up the watershed here. So I think that's the first one. That's a pretty good tree. I'm going to check the diameter on it first. So let me go get my tape and we'll confirm how big it is and see if she's worth putting on the ground. So she's about 15.5-inch diameter there, so I think that's going to be a keeper. She's got a little bit of a, not so dark. She got a little bit of a scar in her here. It's actually weeping sap, and the sap suckers have been after it. So we may cut right above that because that's probably means there's some metal in that. Everything around here has metal in it, since this was an old farm, a lot of gas wells and all that stuff. So we may cut a little bit higher here. Had to move my side-by-side because odds are if I was going to drop it, it would probably end up landing on the side-by-side. So we moved it back. We're about 150 yards from the mill up on the hill. All right, for all you fellers, get it, fellers who are fellers. I know my plunge cut is a little high on the backside. Standing 4 feet in a hole didn't help much. Plunge cut high, hinge was good though, solid hinge. All right, she's a beauty. It's a good thing I moved the side-by-side. It was sitting right there. So it wouldn't have crushed anything, but it would have scratched it up. So fortunately we moved over there. Sometimes Troy uses his noodle. So I love the fact that I got the top here in this clearing. I can obviously get that out, stack it up. We'll chip it at some point, so we'll have some great wood chips from that. So that won't go to waste. And what we're going to do is I'm going to run my tape down the length of this, and it'll give me an idea, A, how much material I can yield, and B, what length logs I need to cut them so I can get them out of here. Usually what I do with poplar is I stop milling, or I stop trying to harvest anything above a main branch. So this guy right here that broke off, that's where I would stop. Got a couple smaller branches. The log's not super straight, or it's not, log's not perfectly straight, but it's still gonna mill up nicely. Let's see what our length is. All right, that is about 55 feet to that branch. So there's some nice logs we can get out of that. So that's easily 4 good 12-foot logs with waste and some of the other things that we'll have to take into consideration. So that'll be a nice haul. Well, All right, so let's see if we can pull a 55-foot long log out of the woods down to the mill. It's not the horsepower of the tractor I'm worried as much as it is the turns that I have to make. It's like a full-size semi trying to drive through the woods. Okay, so it wasn't the turns nor the weight. It was the hump going down the hill. When you feel the back end of the tractor start to come up, then you know something's wrong. So yeah, that turkey was lifting me up there. All right, I think we're going to cut it in half. All right, so I got everything skidded down here, ready to go. I don't know why I worry about not skidding in when it's muddy, because I wallowed these things around. My pigs are cleaner right now than these logs are. What are you gonna do? Anyway, this should last me for a bit with the projects we have. It's nice to have the inventory here on the gravel, so in case it would rain for a couple days, I could still come down, do some milling, and not be wallowing in the mud all the time. So there's two other key things that I consider when I'm producing lumber here off the property, and that's with these logs, is the length. First of all, the length, and of course the actual material I'm trying to get out of them, so looking at the diameter of those. So now that I've got them skidded here, when it comes time to work on my project, I'll look to see what my lengths are that I need for my finished material. And of course you can see with some of the end of the logs, you know, that was my bird's mouth where I actually dropped the log. You don't want to factor that into the length. And some of the other places, anywhere there's a bow or a big knot, then we may want to work around that. So I'll sit down and measure these logs out, look at my cut list and say, okay, well I need X amount of 8-foot material, X amount of 10-foot material, X amount of 12-foot material, whatever it may be, and determine which logs are going to yield the most. And that's why I have all these little, you see these little butt-offs over here, it looks like pieces of firewood. Those are pieces that I cut off because I just bring the log out of the woods kind of arbitrarily, get a rough idea of what it is, and then cut it to what I need. The goal, of course, is to maximize as much material out of each log as possible. So when I look at my cut list and determine the material that I need, the length, then I determine, of course, the dimensions. And one thing that I bounce back and forth on is when it comes to the actual dimensions, you make a 2x4. Do I make a true 2x4, 2 inches by 4 inches, or do I make the hardware store 2x4s, you know, the 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches? And it's one of those things, if my project is going to involve me marrying the two types together, like if I'm going to end up having some store-bought wood, then I try to make the dimensions similar. So I do the 3.5 by 1.5. If I was just doing all milled wood, then probably just go with the 2x4s. Or if I'm trying to get the maximum yield, then maybe 1.5 by 3.5. It really depends on the structural integrity too. I don't want to, since this is air-dried wood, I don't want to assume it is as strong as a kiln-dried piece of wood. Now granted, the stuff you see at the box stores these days, even though it's kiln-dried, looks like it's, you know, it's brittle and can't hold up anything, but that's a whole nother discussion. So as you can see, there's a lot that goes into producing lumber here on the farm just for our projects, depending on whether it's woodworking or some of our barn projects, those type of things. A lot of thought, and as you can tell, it's soaked in sweat, a lot of hassle goes into it, actually getting a tree on the ground, getting it down here on the mill, and then putting it on the mill. It seems like when I'm firing up the mill, the hard part's over. The harvesting and hauling definitely take more of the time. But there's a lot to it, and you can kind of see, give you a look inside all the things that I think about when we're putting together projects here on the farm that are going to come off our mill. Well, we're going to have some new projects that we're going to announce coming up. That's the reason for getting this inventory in, so we'll definitely detail those coming up, so make sure you stick around and look for that. If you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing. I know we've got a lot of people that watch that don't subscribe, and also the way YouTube moves videos around, if you want to be reminded of when we have new videos coming out, then you can hit that notification bell and it'll just send you a push notification on YouTube's app, let you know that we've got a new video out. Or you can look, we're trying to do Fridays and Sundays are our typical video release. Sometimes we'll do some extra there. All right, take care everybody.